Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. We have a lot of issues going around in our province. Well, we should start locally. We have a lot of issues going on, and in our province, our country, and of course in our world. First, we do need to all recognize the fact that the climate crisis is a real thing, and it is something that we need to actually all do something about. The solution that we're looking for may not exist in a corporate manner. It may not exist in a way that somebody is actually going to make money at. It may be that we all need to forget about the money part of making money because of climate crisis, and need to just actually get down to the brass tacks of it and discuss ways of stop burning fuel. So that's being said. It is something that we're not actually hearing from any level of government. We're not hearing it from any level of industry. It is all about, hey, if I cut my emissions, I lose money. So, is it a good thing that we have a provincial energy innovation program that is head up by the biggest of the oil companies, the biggest of those who promote the idea of burning carbon into our atmosphere? Is that necessarily the right way to go? Does that limit the discussion that can actually happen when we have programs like ITER in France, where they're looking at a fusion program that will generate massive amounts of electricity? It's going to take a while to develop. It's going to take a chunk of cooperation and, yes, cash to actually build something on this level. But in the long and short of it is that it won't be a fuel burning situation, at least not a carbon fuel burning situation. So the next issue is of course, along with the fact that we have a lot of control in our government from the oil companies and those who produce a lot of the carbon that we actually burn for fuel, that union jobs, is the union the way to go? A lot of our country and our continent was built on small business. It is the backbone of our economy. Unions actually take away from that. While I agree with the fact that, as you hear later on mentioned by Jagmeet Singh, while he's introducing his jobs plan, that no, the corporations shouldn't have been able to access COVID support monies unless it went directly to workers. Yes, that is true. It needed to happen that way. No, the government didn't actually ensure that would happen. But at the same time, the same monies that should be make sure that they're offered to small businesses. We have to keep the small businesses afloat. Again, they are the backbone of our economy. They're the backbone of our community. They are the community centers that are open as businesses. We need to support them, and we need to make sure that they get the tax breaks, that they get the ability to be able to pay somebody give somebody a paycheck that actually supports their family, their lifestyle, and puts them into a good home. They're the businesses that actually need that money, not the corporations. The corporations, they have board of directors, they have investor supports, they have the ability to access the stock markets and things like that. They don't need that money. They don't need the tax supports that the small businesses actually need, and they're the ones that should actually be getting it. And there is no level of government that actually talks about that. We need as people, we need to actually make sure that our small businesses are well supported, and supported in ways that actually make a difference to our community. Now, of course, all this is really about human rights. And again, we've had tragedies in the past and throughout human history. And when those tragedies come to light, we should come together and support those who need help, and support the idea that truth should be told. We should not. We should no longer be whitewashing what is happening. We should tell the truth and state how it happened, so that we, as a local community, a provincial community, national community, and as a global community, we can all heal from this. We should make sure that the story is told so that those who committed crimes against the human race should be held accountable. How, in what way we want to serve justice, I don't really know. Stuffing somebody in jail isn't always going to be necessarily the way to go. But we should make sure that they are held accountable. We should make sure that all of the records that they hold, it should be turned over to those who need to see them. And those who are harmed in such acts should be supported and held until they have healed. We should be ensuring at this point in our evolution as a human race that all cultures are held equal, that all people are seen as equal and supported. So, with that, why don't we get started with today's show? We're going to hear from Jagmeet Singh. We're going to hear from the BC provincial government. We're going to hear about an immigration plan to help those around the world who need assistance, especially in areas like Afghanistan. And we're going to hear from the WHO with Dr. Tedros and Dr. Etienne from the Pan American Health Organization about how things are going with COVID-19 and ensuring that everyone around the world is getting the medical support that they need. So let's get started. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
My name is Monique Taylor. I'm the very proud MPP for Hamilton Mountain. Today, I'm joined in Hamilton with Jagmeet Singh, the leader of Canada's NDP, Scott Duvall, MP for Hamilton Mountain, Malcolm Allen, NDP candidate for Hamilton Mountain, Nick Milenovich, NDP candidate for Hamilton East, Stony Creek, Marty Warren, Director of USW District 6, USW Local 1005 President Ron Wells. And today we are here to talk about jobs. The pandemic has led to the loss of many jobs in Hamilton and right across Canada. Even before the pandemic, things were getting harder for Canadians. It was becoming more difficult to find jobs with decent wages and basic benefits. Jagmeet has been on tour in southwestern Ontario this week to talk about the NDP jobs plan. The plan promises to create 1 million new jobs to put Canadians back to work. Going back to normal after the pandemic is not an option. Those at the top have enjoyed record profits, while workers have struggled through the pandemic. This is not the way that things need to be. The NDP will help Canadians and Hamiltonians by building better jobs, more jobs, and by protecting the essential workers who got us through the pandemic. With that, I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce to you Marty Warren, Director of USW District 6.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you, Ron and Jim, for welcoming us into 1005's home. It's always good to be in Hamilton. Yeah, it's a workers' town through and through. And you can see that in the New Democrats they elect to represent them, from Monique to Andrea Horvath, to Paul Miller, Sandy Shaw, and of course Scott Duvall, Matthew Green, and in the next election, it'll be Malcolm Allen, Nick Milenovich, and Roberto Inglases. And this city is supported by workers. But those working people have been let down over years of governments that haven't put them first. Liberals and conservative governments have attacked collective bargaining. They've made it harder for workers to organize. They've refused to protect workers' pensions when employers go into bankruptcy. And the liberals even let CEOs collect wage subsidies to pay scabs while they locked out workers. Workers know this plan isn't like any other party's plan. The NDP has our backs. And Jagmeet's Better Jobs plan is just the latest example. It shows Jagmeet understands that everyone deserves a shot at a better job. From trade deals to manufacturing to infrastructure projects, the Liberals and Conservatives have put helping their corporate friends over helping working people. But Jagmeet understands that good jobs not only support families, they help build strong communities. He puts taking care of each other first, and then, in fact, we are stronger together. That is at the heart of his plan. And it is especially important in a place like Hamilton. Jagmeet understands that we have to make sure that what we need in Canada is built in Canada by Canadian materials. From steel to cement to aluminum to wood products, Canadians produce materials we need today, tomorrow, and we can do it with the lowest carbon emissions in the world. Jagmeet understands that supporting the environment and protecting jobs is not an either-or game. We can do both. And we've got to say, when I read the plan, my first reaction was a political leader that says and puts in writing the word union, and I make it part of the plan. Very refreshing and positive, because we know better jobs are union jobs. With that, I want to introduce our leader, a friend of mine, Jagmeet Singh.
Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Monique. Really happy to be here. And thank you to the local president and local 1005. It's also just yesterday 75 years, the anniversary for Local 1005. So big shout out to the local. For being here for so long, almost a century, fighting for workers, supporting workers. It's incredible. I can't think of a better place to make this announcement to talk about jobs than at a place that's been at the forefront of fighting for workers in Hamilton. I'm joined with my colleagues and future MPs and current MPs, and I want to share with you our plan. Our New Democratic plan for more jobs is distinct from other parties because we start off very clearly by saying, first and foremost, the first step of any jobs plan for New Democrats is making sure we actually protect workers. It's better quality work. We can't just celebrate essential workers if we're not actually making sure essential workers have the supports they need. So the first step of our plan is to make sure those workers have the help they need, that there is universal pharmacare and dental care included in our healthcare system, so those workers don't have to worry about getting benefits and don't have to worry about their health. We want to make sure that we lead by example at the federal level with legislated paid sick leave for workers, so no one has to make the impossible choice of going into work sick, risking infecting their colleagues, or staying at home and not knowing if they're actually going to get paid enough to make their bills at the end of the month. We want to make sure that paid sick leave is a hallmark. This pandemic has shown that no worker should ever have to worry about this impossible choice and should be able to stay at home when they're sick. We want to bring in those protections for workers with a solid minimum wage that means that workers are treated with dignity and respect. And we know that the only way we can move forward with any jobs plan is a jobs plan that focuses on giving workers the help they need. Secondly, we need to build. We need to build infrastructure. We need to build public transit. We need to build in Canada to create local jobs. And when we're building, the third part of our plan is to make sure we're using Canadian products. We're using Canadian steel, like Canadian steel made right here in Hamilton. We're using Canadian aluminum, Canadian cement, Canadian wood. We need to use Canadian products when we are investing in public infrastructure. Our public dollars should go towards creating jobs in Canada. And we are unapologetic about wanting that to be the way forward. We also know that this pandemic exposed that a lot of the things that we need to keep each other safe, we don't produce here in Canada. We need to be able to produce protective equipment in Canada. We should be producing vaccines and critical drugs here in Canada. So our plan is to also manufacture in Canada to support the infrastructure and the other investments we're going to make. And finally, we need to take better care of each other. This pandemic has shown that our seniors and our loved ones in long-term care were the brunt of the pandemic. That should never happen again. We need to invest more in long-term care. And when we're investing in long-term care, no one wants to see the money that we invest in long-term care end up in the pockets of CEOs or in dividends paid out to shareholders. So we want to get rid of profit out of long-term care, invest in not-for-profit and public long-term care, invest in creating good jobs. And we know that personal support workers and long-term care workers, when they have good quality work, when they have good conditions of work, it directly means better care for our loved ones. We also want to invest in childcare. This care economy is a key way for us to recover, to create a better society, and to take care of workers and to create more jobs. That's our plan. That's our New Democrat plan. I'm proud to announce it here at Local 1005. I think it's an incredible synergy to be able to announce that here today. Donc aujourd'hui, je vais annoncer notre plan pour créer 1 million plus d'emplois. On a 4 éléments dans notre plan. Premièrement, on exige dans notre plan l'importance d'avoir meilleures conditions de travail pour les travailleurs et travailleuses. On ne peut pas avoir un plan néo-démocrate sans commençant avec l'importance d'une bonne qualité de travail pour les travailleurs. Donc, on doit s'assurer que tout le monde, tous les travailleurs ont accès à une assurance médicaments universelle et des soins dentaires. Deuxièmement, on doit investir dans le transport en commun, dans l'infrastructure, et on doit les bâtir ici. Ça va créer des emplois. Troisièmement, c'est essentiel que quand on investit dans le transport en commun, quand on investit dans l'infrastructure, on utilise les produits canadiens. Ça veut dire l'acier canadien, l'aluminium canadien, l'acier comme l'acier ici, fabriqué ici à Hamilton. Et finalement, ce qu'on veut faire, c'est aussi prendre soin les uns des autres. Ça veut dire investir dans les soins de longue durée et aussi améliorer les accès aux services de garde et investir dans les services de garde. Ça, c'est notre plan pour créer des emplois pour protéger nos travailleurs et travailleuses. Merci, thank you so much. And with that, a big thank you once again to Monique, to Marty for the introduction, to the incredible people behind me who are our team. And I'm looking forward to any questions that you might have. Merci infiniment. Je suis prêt pour vos questions.
Okay, we'll start with questions from the room.
Sorry, my name is Lisa. Could we see your appearance here today as a pre-campaign visit?
Well, Melissa, you're right. It looks like an election is looming. The snap election, if Justin Trudeau calls one, would be because Justin Trudeau wants power. We're still saying, listen, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We've got 2 years left on our mandate. Let's get back to work. Let's go back to Ottawa in September and pass legislation to get people the help they need, to help a recovery that's focused on people. But it looks like Justin Trudeau wants a snap election, and if that's the case, we're ready for it. We would always tour in the summer to make sure we connect with people, and we're ready for an election if that's what Justin Trudeau decides to do.
And what do you like about Hamilton?
Oh, Hamilton's an incredible city. I got a lot of deep connections to Hamilton. My brother went to McMaster, so while I was in law school, I would often visit up on my younger brother to make sure he's okay, and we'd hang out in Hess Village, we'd hang out at the university, spend lots of time, and I just cruising around a really cool community, and I got to really enjoy and appreciate how amazing Hamilton was. Just recently, I was just telling some folks, we did a little bike ride from Hamilton to Dundas, or from Brampton to Dundas, and so made it into the Hamilton region, which was pretty incredible. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move now to questions on Zoom if there are no other questions in the room. And so the first question through our Zoom is David Thurton. We're just going to ask journalists to please identify the outlet that you're with when you speak. So please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. The border was a topic of discussion between the premiers and the prime minister. Are you ready to see the border open?
Thanks, David. I appreciate the question. I grew up in a border town. I grew up in Windsor, and I was just there a couple of days ago. And just for folks that don't know, for a lot of communities in Canada, there is not just it's not just about tourism and people coming across the border, which is important. We need that. Our tourist sector has been hard hit, but it's also about people's families, their connection, their work, their employment. There are a lot of deep connections that people share over the border. And for almost 18 months, people have been denied the ability to see their family. We had a really heartbreaking story in Windsor where a local worker's son was sick in Detroit, and he couldn't see him, and he had to take a flight to be able to get over to see his son, which is just a 15-minute drive over the border. So there's a lot of pain felt by people who are being displaced and not able to connect with one another, and folks feeling isolated. So we need to see a clear plan. What I want to see is that transparency. We're hearing again kind of a big notion of sometime in April or sometime in August. We need a clear plan. We need to know what the path is. What are the steps required to get there? People need transparency, and so they can kind of plan their lives. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that makes it even worse. When people know once we get to this level of vaccination or once we get to this level of safety, we can then see the borders open up and we've got a firm date. That gives people a bit of something to look forward to. So that's what we want to see. We also want to make sure that when we do that, we do it in a safe way that doesn't put at risk Canadians.
I'll just follow up here. In terms of, what happens if cases start rising? What criteria do you need to see, or what criteria would you like to see if cases start rising, and we might need to consider closing the border? Are you concerned about that? Would you like to see certain criteria that if, cases start rising on either side, here or there, in the US or in Canada, that we might have to reclose the border?
What I know has been really difficult for a lot of people is the opening and closing. That's been really hard on businesses. That's been really hard on people when things open up and then shut down right away. We need to see a plan that allows us to stay open, and we want a plan that keeps people safe. And we want to make sure we're following all the expert advice of public health officials. That's really what we want to see, but we can't have a haphazard approach, which we've seen in Ontario with a Conservative premier who didn't follow the evidence, didn't make the right decisions, opened up, shut down, opened up again. It has been incredibly difficult for a lot of small businesses. I spoke to an owner on the way in, and she shared how difficult it was for her going through those lockdowns and reopenings. And so we need to make sure that the plan is one which is a solid evidence-based plan, keeps Canadians safe, and one that doesn't result in quick changes, opening and closing. That's not going to help anyone.
So, first of all, the Liberals, they are investing billions of dollars in this pandemic. What's the NDP plan for jobs?
So I really appreciate the question. We've gone through a really tough time, and it's been a difficult time for so many people. Workers have lost their jobs. Small businesses have been forced to shut their doors, and many of them aren't sure if they can open up ever again. So we need to have an aggressive stimulus to create jobs. That stimulus, though, has to be really focused on creating jobs. And what I'm concerned about is when we push for example, the wage subsidy to be increased. We are proud that we forced the Liberals to increase it to 75%. We also said there needed to be a clear stipulation that no company could take public money and lay off workers, or no company could take public money and pay out dividends to their shareholders or increase pay for their executives. We saw other countries put those measures forward. Germany, for example, had very strict measures that any public money that went to a company could not go to a company if they breached any of the conditions that meant that the money wasn't going directly to workers. So that's one of my key focuses. We are committed to a jobs recovery plan that puts workers first, that makes sure that workers have good conditions of work, but also one that is directly tied to employment and does not allow for companies to take that public money and misuse it, use it to enrich themselves, their executives, or their shareholders. That's really the big difference between New Democrats. We've called for this from the beginning. Liberals and Conservatives didn't think it was important and didn't support our initiative to bring it forward.
And the poll is through the
I really appreciate the question, and the direct answer is no. The federal government has not done enough. They've talked a lot. Justin Trudeau's said a lot of words, but hasn't really backed that up with action. We've been saying there's a number of things that can happen right away. We know that online hate is directly radicalizing people, and it has been the cause of some of the horrible incidents we've seen in the killing in the massacre in Quebec City, and in the massacre or the killing of a Muslim man in Toronto. In both cases, the attackers were found to have been radicalized by extreme right-wing and white supremacist websites. Despite knowing that, and despite that being years ago, the Liberal government has not acted to tackle online hate. And that to me is very sad. It's hurtful and it's wrong because people continue to feel the brunt of Islamophobia. We need to make sure that our public resources at the federal level, at the security services level, is being used to tackle the groups that are spreading this hateful message and tackle that as well. There's a lot that can be done immediately, and I have not seen action. And as a result, the Muslim community is really still feeling uncertain and worried and afraid, and we need to do a lot better. Justin Trudeau needs to stop just saying things and start doing some things.
Okay, we'll go back to Zoom for the next set of questions. We have another question from David Thurton. So David, please go ahead.
Mr. Singh, I just want to come back to, the possibility of closing the border if cases rise. Just so I get you on this clearly, should the government be open to the possibility of having to, reclose the border? Should that be part of their plan that you really want to see, a detailed plan that you really want to see? Should that be an option if cases get out of hand on either side?
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify on that. Yes, absolutely. That should be that is always a potential scenario where we might have lockdowns in the future if cases get really high in general. And with the border as well, we need to be vigilant. If there's cases that increase, that we need to be aware of that. But what I want us to do is to make the right decision so that we are not in a situation where we're opening and closing, shutting down and reopening. Ideally, if we make the right decisions, if we follow through with the public health advice, that we are in a position we are going steadily towards opening and not opening and closing. That would be my preference, but we need to have contingency plans in place. So yes, we should have plans that include if there is a serious outbreak and if there's a serious risk to Canadians, we need to be able to move quickly with some clear decisions.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Tech Accelerator Center. It's my pleasure to MC today's event. I would like to begin by acknowledging with gratitude and respect that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Foresight is Canada's clean tech accelerator. We bring innovators, industry, investors, government, and academia together to address today's most urgent climate issues and support a global transition to a green economy. We are delighted to be part of this announcement today. BC has an incredible opportunity to see clean tech become a new energy engine for economic growth, as long as we can leverage deliberate, targeted investments combined with strong climate policy. This is part of what makes today's announcement both timely and exciting. It is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to British Columbia's Premier, John Horgan.
Thank you, Jeanette, for that introduction, and thank you for taking on this responsibility this morning. I, too, want to acknowledge the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and also to thank Susanna Pierce from Shell Canada, Minister Ravi Kahlon, Minister of Jobs, Innovation and Technology, for joining us today, as well as Santa Ono and Minister Carla Qualtrough, who will be coming in via Zoom as a reminder of COVID-19 still being with us and the opportunity to ensure that everyone can participate in what is a very exciting announcement for the future of climate action, not just here in British Columbia, but indeed across Canada. It has been a very, very devastating beginning to the summer of 2021. We remember vividly the fires of 2017 and 2018. They did not accompany a heat dome that led to the deaths of many British Columbians because of our inability to better prepare for the climate future that we all need to live in. And we're here today to talk about how we can get all hands on deck, bringing industry, academia, and orders of government together to address the challenge of our time. We need meaningful action, not just today, but every day as we go forward for this generation and future generations to meet the challenges of moving from a future that is less reliant on fossil fuels and more focused on clean, innovative changes to how we do business, not just here in British Columbia and in Canada, but indeed around the world. And that's why we're partnering with industry today and other orders of government to make that happen, to create a new BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy. Together, today, we're announcing a $105 million investment in kickstarting this low innovation future. Together, British Columbia has already become a destination for clean, low carbon technologies, and we want to build on that by starting this innovation today. The Centre, of course, will have many strengths. We'll act as an accelerator, which, of course, Jeanette is expert at, and incubating new clusters of technology companies that can help meet the challenges of our time. Businesses developing and commercializing and scaling up is a challenge not just in British Columbia and in Canada, but indeed around the world. So by coming together today, as we are with the Clean Innovation Centre, we can create the future that we all know that we need. That will mean focusing on investments in new companies that are starting green hydrogen, biofuels, renewable natural gas, battery technologies, and all of the innovations we're going to need to meet the challenges of our time. I want to thank Minister Bruce Ralston, who couldn't be with us here today, for his hard work to get us to this first step as we launch the Innovation Centre, which we hope to have open as early as this fall. Bruce's work has been critical to getting us here, and I believe all of us have to take the same level of energy and focus to meet these challenges. If we are going to have the clean future we all know we need to do it together. Industry, governments of all kinds, as well as, of course, citizens. This is an exciting day for our future, and it's an exciting day for, of course, the generations to come. We're already making, as you know, through Clean BC, significant investments getting people out of fossil fuel cars and into electric vehicles, significant expansions of our public transit systems in collaboration with the federal government. We're seeing the Broadway line making its way all the way to UBC. Santa will be happy to hear that. As well as, of course, our recent announcement just last week of the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain system, which will help, again, reduce our emissions and get us back on track to meet the objectives that we must meet collectively, not just as British Columbians and Canadians, but as world citizens to meet the challenges of our time. We cannot let this summer the elimination of the community of Lytton go by without taking immediate action, not just today, but every day going forward. Thanks for joining us. I look forward to working with all of the partners as we build a better BC.
Thank you, Premier Horgan. I'm delighted now to introduce Honourable Carla Qualtrough, Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion, who will be joining us by Zoom.
Introduction. Good morning, everyone. A special welcome and hello to Premier John Horgan, Ms. Susanna Pierce from Shell, of course, Dr. Santa Ono from UBC, and my fellow friend in Delta, Minister Ravi Kahlon, MLA for Delta North, and Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. Today, as the Premier said, is an exciting day, and I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Tsawwassen and Musqueam First Nations. It's said that while climate change is measured globally, its impacts are felt locally. And here in BC, we understand and live this reality. BC has recently had record high and extreme temperatures, not just for BC, but for all of Canada, causing hundreds of health-related deaths, as well as everything from intense forest fires to localized flood advisories. The message could not be clearer. Climate change is real. It's happening now, and its impacts will only intensify. It's already taking a terrible human toll, and it's having a profound and lasting impact on our communities, our environment, and our economy. This means that our governments have to act, and that's why we've teamed up with the province of BC and Shell Canada to support the new BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy. This centre reflects our government's own vision for investing in new technologies and cleaner fuels that will deliver our low-carbon future, a future that creates good jobs, dramatically reduces emissions, and leaves no one behind. The same building blocks that will help us achieve our ambitious goal of reducing Canada's 2005 GHG emission levels by up to 45% before this decade is out, and ultimately become a net zero nation by 2050. We've backed up our climate commitments with a strengthened climate plan and a new budget this spring that together would add another $32.6 billion in federal investments. This includes funding to help drive breakthroughs in many of the same areas this centre will be pursuing, everything from carbon capture to clean hydrogen. In fact, our budget provided specific investments to support such innovations, including $1.5 billion for our Clean Fuels Fund, $319 million over 7 years to fund R&D. This is how we create a future that our children will inherit with pride and build upon with confidence. By working together at all levels of government and with all potential partners, British Columbia and Shell are perfect examples. We don't need to be told that our province has long been a national leader on clean growth, including the first jurisdiction to put a price on carbon. We know that the only thing that can match our province's spectacular beauty is our shared determination to protect it. And Shell's participation is equally essential, not just because it's been setting the pace for the oil and gas sector for years, or because of its experience with clean technologies such as its Quest Carbon Capture and Storage Protection project in Fort Saskatchewan, but because its employees and all of our oil and gas workers across the country will be critical to achieving our climate goals. They are the engineers, the scientists, and the tradespeople who know how to build energy infrastructure, and they are the same people who will build our renewables, the same people who will help develop tomorrow's innovations and new technologies. The world is looking to Canada to lead the way to net zero emissions. That's what we're doing here today, providing leadership. And our government is proud to be contributing up to $35 million to support innovative, made in BC clean tech solutions. I want to congratulate you, Premier, especially, and our partners at Shell, and everyone who helped make this day possible. I wish you great success with this project. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you, Minister Qualtrough. Next up, it is my pleasure to join me in welcoming Susanna Pierce, Country Chair Canada and GM Renewables and Energy Solutions Canada with Shell.
Thank you, Jeanette, and good day. It's an honor to join you on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'm here in good health and good spirit, and hope that all of you are as well. And thank you, Premier, Minister Callan, Minister Qualtrough, for such fantastic remarks. You know, it's heartwarming to hear the commitment to workers and the commitment to livelihoods and the commitment to do something with climate change. I think we've seen the devastating impacts of the pandemic, but we're also seeing the devastating impacts of climate today, which is why bold, urgent action by government, industry such as ourselves, and all of us need to come together, committed to do more, and to do more in a faster fashion. For Shell, our target is become a net zero business by 2050, in step with society, and in step with society is critical. What that means is we will do everything we can to reduce our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. What does that mean? The emissions that we produce, the emissions that we cause to be produced, but critically, the emissions that the customers produce. And that is where the majority of the emissions come from. So that's a bold commitment that we have, but we cannot do it alone. We know as Shell that our current business plans don't get us there, and that means we need to change. I have personally been a long-time proponent of doing more with less carbon, and in my new role as President and Country Chair of Shell Canada, as well as GM Renewables and Energy Solutions, I am more committed and have the power to do more than I ever have before. And I'm proud to be in an organization like Shell that I can do it with. I'm also proud to be here in BC, living in BC as a resident, and proud that we can do more in this great province. So I'm seized with the opportunity to find great opportunities in new energies and technologies, biofuels, green and blue hydrogen, EV charging, and renewable power, such as solar and wind. There is a vast landscape of opportunities. There's also a critical opportunity to invest in the new technologies to get them to the scale where they can make significant impact. So this is why it's abundantly clear that joint action is needed to meet the challenge of climate change, and it does mean partnering across the aisle. It means partnering with governments. It means partnering with like-minded businesses, including customers, universities, other organizations, as well as Indigenous, local communities, and environmental groups. Now, we must also tackle those emissions that come from the most hard-to-abate sectors that can't easily be electrified, and that's aviation, that's shipping, and road freight. And I know, as a BCer, that BC has all the right conditions to make these collaborations work. We have supportive government policy, growing customer demand for low-carbon energy solutions, and a province that sits as Canada's gateway to Asia and to the U.S. Pacific Northwest. It is our hope that the Centre for Innovation in Clean Energy will act as a catalyst, accelerating transformative changes within the province energy system in targeted areas that support BC government's Clean BC plan. Now, we are pleased to support Clean BC and the commercialization and scale-up of clean energy companies across the province and across Canada. And along with strengthening the ecosystem for innovation, this initiative will bring economic, environmental, and societal benefits to the province and beyond by helping to attract new investment and jobs in a more sustainable economy while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, we've seen the power of public and private partnerships before, and just very recently for Shell in Canada, we've made significant investments in waste-to-low carbon fuels in Quebec and also in Ontario in investing in a unique biofuels opportunity called Forge, and we will continue to do that here in British Columbia. Now more than ever, we need pioneering governments, businesses who are willing to step up and initiate change. I'm grateful for the leadership shown by the governments of Canada and BC and very pleased to join them in founding the Centre. But we are just the start. We are challenging other like-minded businesses and companies to join us to maximize the diversity and the impact of this Centre. More than ever, we must work together to help accelerate climate solutions that scale across society. We are looking forward to the many successful enterprises to be launched by the Centre in the months and years to come. Thank you.
Wow, it's so hard for me not to want to applaud and comment on all of these great components of the announcement. So thank you, Susanna. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, the Honourable Ravi Kahlon, Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation.
Good morning, and thank you, Jeanette. I'm Ravi Kahlon, BC's Minister for Jobs, Economic Recovery, and Innovation. And I want to also acknowledge that I am here today on the territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish peoples. It's great to be here this morning with Premier Horgan, my federal colleague and my MP, Carla Qualtrough, Minister Carla Qualtrough, and all these distinguished guests. Building a better and cleaner future is something that British Columbians, myself included, hold near and dear. Working together, we need to find new ways to fight climate change. Today's announcement, the BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy, is one of the ways that we're working to do that. The centre will build on and complement the work we are doing with Clean BC. With collaboration at the forefront, the Centre will help position British Columbia as a global leader in finding innovative solutions to combat climate change. To help shape our economic recovery, I've been meeting with provincial leaders, Indigenous nations, and experts to hear their perspectives and ideas on the way forward for BC. During these sessions, I've heard loud and clear that climate change and building a cleaner economy are top of mind for British Columbians as we move forward with our economic recovery. People want a better future that will last generations. They want a future that will make a difference for their loved ones. And they want long-term, clean growth that is innovative, sustainable, and includes everyone who lives and works in this beautiful province. We know that Clean BC is critical for a better future. We're striving to build an economic plan that reflects the priorities, strengths, and values of people here in British Columbia. As part of this plan, we will be focused on low-carbon investments that will bring multiple economic benefits, including good-paying jobs and long-term resilience. Through key investments like the BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy, we look forward to working together to find solutions that will help us build a stronger BC. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Kahlon. We have one final speaker joining us today by Zoom. I'd have the honor of introducing to you virtually Dr. Santa Ono, President of UBC.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join this exciting announcement about British Columbia's Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy. I'd like to first acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Recent events have shown how climate change is having a dramatic and disproportionate impact on Canada's Indigenous peoples. I want to acknowledge how critical it is that meaningful climate action must take steps to support and amplify the human rights of Indigenous peoples. The climate crisis is a pressing challenge that will require determination, innovation, and collaboration to tackle. I'm excited that the BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy will exemplify this by bringing together the federal and provincial governments, research institutions like UBC, and industry like Shell. And beyond us here today, there is great potential for this centre to expand partnerships across society to work collaboratively to address this defining issue of our time. I know that I and many British Columbians and Canadians who care deeply about the climate are excited to see what the Centre will achieve and the innovations that it will support. It is yet another example of how British Columbia will lead, not only Canada, but the world. Accelerating action to combat climate change is a priority, not only for the provincial government, but for UBC and for all British Columbians. In 2019, UBC issued a declaration on the climate emergency, affirming our responsibility in actively combating climate change, to effect change beyond our institution, and to advance a sustainable and just society across the province, Canada, and the world. We are following the leadership of you, Premier Horgan. This declaration builds on many years of climate leadership at the university, which includes adopting aggressive GHG emission reduction targets that we are achieving by integrating sustainable practices and technologies across campus infrastructure and operations, all while growing our campus footprint.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Bon matin tout le monde. Merci de nous joindre à nous pour cette annonce importante. Thank you for this important announcement. I will now pass the floor over to begin our event to the Honorable Marco Mendicino, Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Je passe la parole maintenant à M. Marco Mendicino, ministre de l'Immigration, des Réfugiés et de la Citoyenneté. À vous.
Good morning. At the outset, it's important to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional indigenous territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Haudenosaunee. I would also like to note the presence of a number of special guests for today's announcement, two of whom are joining us virtually from Europe. Andrew Anderson, Executive Director of the Frontline Defenders, and Gerald Stabarok, Chair of the Board of ProtectDefenders.eu. And of course, we're also very fortunate to have with us Rima Jamus, UNHCR Canada representative, Kamali Powell from Rainbow Railroad, and Peter Schaller from Penn Canada. We're grateful to all of you, not only for being present today, but for your unwavering advocacy and work in the advancement of human rights through refugee resettlement. Canada has a long and proud tradition of welcoming the world's most vulnerable, a tradition that this government has upheld and strengthened. Since forming government in 2015, we have more than doubled our annual refugee resettlement levels. We launched and successfully carried out numerous historic initiatives, including Operation Syrian Refugee, which resulted in over 70,000 being resettled here in Canada. And they're now contributing in communities across the country, including restaurant entrepreneur Razul Alabrak, who runs Damascus House in London, Ontario. I recently had the honor of meeting Razul and his family, and I highly recommend the mixed skewers, by the way. The government has also introduced and expanded pathways for Yazidis and survivors of Daesh, guardian angels, and many other vulnerable populations. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic, in a closed borders world, Canada still managed to welcome roughly a third of all refugees resettled around the world. And on World Refugee Day, just a few weeks ago, I announced 3 new measures to further build on this foundation. First, the Economic Mobility Pilot Project, which recognizes the talents and skills of refugees by welcoming them through economic immigration streams. The pilot project successfully partners with business leaders who sponsor refugees into targeted positions. And not only does this collaboration help make Canadian businesses more competitive, it also allows the sponsored refugees to hit the ground running. And that's why I was pleased to unveil the next phase of the EMPP, which will help resettle 500 refugees and their families under this pilot. Second, we said we would boost our world-renowned private sponsorship of refugees program by launching a call for proposals to improve support services provided by private sponsors and to ensure refugees take full advantage of the assistance that is offered to them. And third, we committed that Canada would nearly double the number of protected persons from 23,500 to 45,000 this year. And this means that more vulnerable persons can quickly become permanent residents, reunite with their families, and set down roots in their communities. When the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, says that Canada is a bright light, you know he means it. Cette lumière brille grâce à la générosité.
Canada is a very generous country, and Canadians have been very generous in welcoming refugees in their communities. That is who we are. That's the Canadian spirit. We are open, compassionate, and generous.
Efforts are making a difference. However, the work is not done. We live in an increasingly complex and uncertain world where human rights and democracy itself is under siege. When we think about resettlement, we envision those who've been involuntarily displaced from their homes due to war, conflict, and persecution. At the same time, we must not overlook those who bear witness to these human tragedies, who are active through demonstration and reporting, so the rest of us can be informed. But in doing so, they risk persecution, arrest, torture, and even death. As a result, increasingly journalists and human rights defenders are compelled to leave their countries as a means of escaping the threats that they face. In 2020, the number of journalists murdered for their reporting doubled. Pour ceux qui défendent les droits de la personne.
Those who defend human rights, including journalists, university, community, and humanitarian workers, risks to their safety is real.
Who put themselves at great risk in the name of democracy, accountability, freedom, and human rights. From authoritarian regimes to organized crime, the threats have never been more severe. That means those who stand up for human rights need our protection more than ever. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Today, we're announcing that Canada is creating a dedicated refugee stream to provide a safe haven for human rights defenders who have fled persecution in their home country. Aujourd'hui, je suis fier d'annoncer.
Today, I am proud to announce a new dedicated refugee stream to offer refugee status to those who have defended human rights and who are in danger in their countries.
World to offer a dedicated pathway to permanent residence for human rights defenders. By launching this new refugee stream, we're sending a clear message around the globe that in the face of growing dangers, Canada stands with the defenders of human rights. Through this initiative, we expect to resettle 250 government-assisted refugees per year, including their family members, and to provide them with the support they need to make Canada their new home. This will include a particular focus on persons who are at heightened risk, such as women and LGBTQ2 individuals. Now, we cannot do this work alone. We are going to get it done by partnering with those already doing incredible work on the ground, partners such as Protect Defenders and Frontline Defenders, as well as the United Nations Refugee Agency and other Canadian organizations. All of them are going to help us identify those human rights defenders who are in need of resettlement. And let me take a moment to acknowledge the multiple Canadian organizations that have been instrumental in putting this program together by providing their expert input, including Amnesty International, the Canadian Council of Refugees, the Canadian Journalists for Free Expressions, Kairos, Scholars at Risk, PEN Canada, and Rainbow Railroad. I'm pleased to have representatives from two of these organizations joining us today, Peter Schaller from PEN Canada and Kamali Powell from Rainbow Railroad. Both of them and their organizations exemplify the power of dedicated Canadians in supporting persecuted human rights defenders around the world, whether they're persecuted as LGBTQ2 activists or fighters, or those who are defending free expression. Comme nous le savons tous, la pandémie mondiale a touché.
We all know that all programs, including refugee resettlement programs, have been affected by the pandemic.
Which is why we will act with urgency to get these people to Canada. So, we also have the option to process some cases under the Urgent Protection Program, for which national interest exemption letters may be issued to exempt these cases from existing travel restrictions where necessary. We will work with our provincial and territorial partners, municipalities, settlement organizations, and partners like the human rights organizations that I have already mentioned to determine in which communities these individuals will settle. And let me address one last but very important point. To protect these individuals from the persecution that they have escaped, we will not disclose where these human rights defenders will settle. In closing, let me underline how proud I am of this initiative and all of the organizations who have supported us to get to this point. Elle démontre la compassion et l'expertise du Canada.
This shows Canada's expertise and compassion. We are helping human rights defenders and their families. We are offering them protection with a dedicated pathway to permanent residence in a country with an excellent track record in refugee resettlement.
Borders, we need to look ahead and consider what we can do to better protect some of the world's most vulnerable people. This work has never been easy or simple, but it is necessary. And Canadians know and share in the responsibility to carry that work forward. Thank you. Merci. And I will now ask Rima to say a few words, followed by Andrew from Frontline Defenders, and then Gerald from protectdefenders.eu. Rima.
The UN Refugee Agency is proud to be working with IRCC, Frontline Defenders, and protectdefenders.eu in developing the important initiative announced by the Minister today. Since its creation 70 years ago, UNHCR has been providing protection and life-saving assistance to refugees around the world. Unfortunately, our work and that of our humanitarian partners is needed more than ever. Despite the COVID pandemic and repeated calls for a global ceasefire to halt the violence and persecution which drive refugee movements, today there are over 26 million refugees around the world. While this number may seem overwhelming and the situation hopeless, we must not forget that each and every person forcibly displaced from their home not only represents a story of loss and suffering, but also one of hope and resilience. Among them are refugees in desperate need of resettlement. They are survivors of torture, women and girls at risk of sexual violence, LGBTQI people persecuted simply for being themselves, or small children with medical needs that cannot be met where they are. They are also persons who have put their own lives on the line to advocate for fundamental freedoms. They are human rights defenders. The initiative announced today recognizes the critical role refugee resettlement to Canada can play for those in danger, for promoting the protection and realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Not only does resettlement save lives, but as the world faces steadily increasing numbers of forcibly displaced people, it is a tangible way for countries to show solidarity and share the responsibility of welcoming refugees. Unfortunately, there is a tremendous gap between the number of refugees who need resettlement and those lucky enough to be given this life-saving opportunity. Last year, resettlement levels were their lowest in 20 years because of COVID restrictions and a reduced number of places around the world. As UNHCR continues to advocate for more resettlement places, we also thank Canada for its leadership. Through the initiative announced today, Canada has increased critical resettlement opportunities and has also encouraged other states to do the same. Today's announcement continues the strong tradition of Canada's resettlement program and builds on a solid record of providing life-saving opportunities to refugees with unique protection needs. The UN Refugee Agency welcomes this initiative, which not only helps to advance the protection of human rights defenders globally, but also makes resettlement available for more refugees who need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rima. Merci. And now, Andrew.
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Minister Mendicino, for this initiative and also for the opportunity to work together with you to make this something that really delivers for human rights defenders and those in particular who are most at need. Frontline Defenders welcome the launch of a dedicated Canadian refugee stream for human rights defenders at risk, and we commend the Canadian government on its leadership in this area, and it really is leading. It's going way beyond what any other government is doing in terms of real support, and we hope not only that this initiative will be successful and provide much needed support to those human rights defenders who need it, but also be an example that other governments will follow in order to ensure a strengthened international protection for human rights defenders at risk. The human rights defenders we work with, the vast majority of them want to continue to work inside their countries. They're working day to day to try and make a difference on behalf of their communities. Just this week, I heard of 2 women human rights defenders who had been outside of Afghanistan who've gone back to Kabul because of the crisis in order to try and continue to support their colleagues amongst the women's rights defender community there in Afghanistan, where there's a huge crisis happening with killings and with the forced evacuation of people out of some of the parts of the country to Kabul and elsewhere. And it's exactly in that kind of extreme situation where people's lives are at risk that this initiative can make a real difference. The ability to provide safe resettlement for those who have the courage to stand up for human rights is not just about helping those people who are forced to flee, but it's about sending an important message that those who stand up for human rights, who are willing to take on the autocrats and the extremists to defend those who are most marginalised, they are recognised. We appreciate and support the contribution they are making to the advancement of human rights. And so I see this not only as a really practical measure that will help many people, but also as something that sends a powerful signal that defence of human rights is something that needs stronger international support, and we need to work harder and work together. And we're very pleased to have the opportunity to work with Canada, with the UNHCR and with ProtectDefenders.eu on this initiative, but that we need to strengthen those who are working together in support of human rights defenders at risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And now I will turn over to Gerald.
Merci beaucoup et tout d'abord un grand
Thank you for this very important initiative to the Government of Canada and to Minister Mendicino. And now I will speak in English.
Is a coalition, a consortium of 12 organizations that work to deliver concrete protection to human rights for defenders in need, most at risk, in every corner of the world, no matter what issue on human rights they address. For us, this initiative that you're launching and the partnership that you're proposing to us is fundamentally important, both because it is an expression of your commitment to the protection of human rights defenders and to human rights, but also because this scheme will provide a very practical additional tool to protect human rights offenders when they're in dire need, when they can't return, when their life is threatened. And I think you said it before, and I think it's important to reiterate this. This is a unique scheme that recognizes the special needs and the special need for protection of human rights offenders in this context, and it will provide an important additional avenue of protection. When I look at the world today, I just have to go to Afghanistan. Andrew mentioned it. What is the situation of defenders in a place like this today? Think about Belarus, what is happening today with the detention searches of human rights offenders in the country. Go to a place closer to you, to Central America, the killings of human rights defenders, the detention of defenders in Colombia and Venezuela, or let's go to Africa, DRC and many other countries. What we've seen over the world is that the right to defend has to be recognized as a right. It is normal to defend rights. People do this because they want to do this for their society. They may criticize their society or their governments, but they firmly believe in the future of their governments, and we have to do everything to support them and protect them, that they can do human rights work in their countries. But sadly, as I mentioned, with the countries I mentioned, and this is just a snapshot, I think collectively there's a documentation of over 300 human rights offenders killed every year. There's a documentation of some 400, 500 human rights offenders in detention every year. There are situations where people have to go outside their country because there's no alternative. And finding lasting solutions is often very difficult. And I think it is in those situations that this scheme will make a real life difference to human rights defenders. It is like a safety net, a safety option that is very, very important. Let's be clear, human rights defenders want a better country that they serve for. They want to stay. They want to continue working on human rights, like the example of the 2 human rights defenders of Afghanistan that my colleague Andrew mentioned illustrate. But there are situations when they defend our rights, our values, that they also deserve our solidarity and protection.
Yo. Yo. Yo.
Sheila Malcolmson.
Thank you so much, friends. Thank you for joining us today. I recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Songhees First Nation and the Esquimalt First Nation. I also want to recognize I'm thinking of home today. I come from Snuneymuxw territory. The news this week of the affirmation of what has been known about unmarked graves on Penelakut Island, the former Cooper Island Residential School, is just one more wave of revelation and a very hard time and a time of truth. I recognize that impact on the people that we serve. I also to send thanks to everybody that's working hard on the front lines in the wildfires this week and send our strength to those who are at the brunt of the impacts. Today I'm with Dr. Bonnie Henry, BC's Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Shannon MacDonald, the Acting Chief Medical Officer of the First Nations Health Authority, and Dr. Matthew Chow, the President of Doctors of BC. We are here together to take another step responding to British Columbia's overdose public health emergency. Far too many people in British Columbia have died from toxic drug poisoning, and many listening have lost loved ones in recent days, weeks, months over this particularly hard last year. I extend my condolences on behalf of the province and the Premier to everybody who's missing a family member or a friend. British Columbia is in the 6th year of the overdose emergency with more than 7,000 lives lost. It is tragic and it is unacceptable. And for people working on the front lines of this crisis, who have been working so hard to save lives, this is particularly hard to accept that the pandemic has represented such a setback in that work. That we are still losing lives is unacceptable. I also recognize that many working on the front lines have themselves lost friends and peers. For people who use drugs or care about someone who does, keeping safe in this public health emergency is front of mind. So our government is delivering new and innovative solutions that work together to help people stay safe and to access the supports that they need and deserve. That's why today we are expanding prescribed safe supply in British Columbia to separate people who use drugs from the increasingly toxic illicit drug supply. This builds on the work that we've been doing over the past year. At the start of the pandemic, we provided access to some prescribed safer supply to separate people from the increasingly toxic illicit drug supply. Thousands of people took this up. But we've heard from people who use drugs and from medical professionals that more options and expanded access to safer supply are needed. Today's new policy builds on what we learned during the pandemic and includes input from many partners and stakeholders, including people with lived and living experience, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, health authorities, and Indigenous-led organizations. This new policy will help to separate more people from the poison supply, to connect them to ongoing health care and support, and to stabilize their lives. We are investing $22.6 million arising from this April's budget for the next 3 years, directed to health authorities to implement this expanded policy on prescribed safe supply. These funds will support planning, phased implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of prescribed safer supply products. This means that once fully implemented, more people who use illicit drugs can be prescribed a broader range of safer alternatives covered by pharmacare, including a range of opioids and stimulants as determined by each program and prescriber. This new policy was developed within the limits of the Federal Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, which requires controlled substances to be provided by prescription. BC is leading the country as the first province to offer prescribed safe supply. And we have had to introduce prescribed safe supply carefully, responding to the urgent need for solutions and supporting patient safety and prescribers at every step of the way. During the first phase of this expansion, prescribed safer supply will be available in existing health authority funded programs that currently offer substance use services, through newly created programs such as service hubs and outreach teams supported through Budget 2021, and through existing federally funded SAFER programs. This expansion work is already underway with every health authority in BC. We've built in rigorous monitoring and evaluation to ensure that we're on the right path, and further phases will expand access once that clinical guidance is developed based on this evaluation. Everyone's working as quickly as we can to implement existing safe supply programs and to build further capacity as we bring more prescribers on board and get new programs online. I thank the courageous doctors and nurse practitioners who work tirelessly to prescribe safe supply, that do this work already, and who back this policy, this new policy that will help more people in British Columbia get the care and the support that they deserve. This kind of change only can happen through a groundswell of collaboration, and I thank everyone who's contributed to this work to date and has worked over this past year with our ministry's Overdose Emergency Response Centre to get this policy moving. We know there is more work to do. There is no silver bullet to end the overdose crisis. And prescribed safer supply is one tool within a comprehensive set of health interventions to help keep people safe and access the support they need, the supports that they need, including treatment and recovery. Just as there are many paths into addiction, there are many paths out, and so we are working hard to offer people options. As we continue to grapple with the overdose emergency, I'm thankful for the good work being done on the ground, saving lives every day. Because of this good work, and the many life-saving interventions brought in since 2016, modeling says that over 6,000 lives have been saved. This new policy will help save more lives. With that, I introduce BC's Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, to add some remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. As we are in the tragic sixth year of the toxic drug overdose crisis, public health emergency here in British Columbia, and as the Minister has indicated, since then, more than 7,000 people in British Columbia, our friends, our family, our community members, have lost their lives to a poisoned drug supply. And for every life cut tragically short, there are countless more lives that have been changed forever. Our parents, grandparents, children, friends, spouses, and community members left behind, mourning the loss of a loved one, and no more so, tragically, than in this past year and a half, where we've not been able to come together to support each other. This is a tragedy for all of us as British Columbians, and my thoughts are with everyone who has lost somebody they love to this crisis as well. As we have grappled with the overdose emergency, we have learned and continue to learn the many steps we can take to address the harms. Steps like overdose prevention sites, supervised consumption sites, the take-home naloxone program, which has saved lives across this province, and increasing the number of youth and adult treatment beds have all made a difference, and in many cases, saved lives. But since the onset of COVID-19, the already toxic drug supply has become even more dangerous, and we have seen that in all parts of BC over this past 18 months. And measures we needed to take to respond to this pandemic have led to a record number of our family, our community members' lives lost to this toxic drug supply. And while we continue to reduce the risk of COVID-19 from our collective actions across the province, the risks from this highly toxic illicit drugs remains greater than ever. This is why this is so important to expand the access to prescribed safer supply. to separate people from this toxic drug supply that we know is there now, every day, to offer medications and connect people with the supports that they need to ongoing health care and other needs. Expanding access to safer supply is a vital step that also helps us reduce stigma around people who use drugs and better support people who need this help. A little over 2 years ago, I provided guidance on how we could do this together in British Columbia, ensuring that as we expand access in a way that protects people who use drugs and prescribers, and that we learn as we go, including making sure that we have independent evaluation to put the evidence together to continue to do the best possible programs that we can. We also know that this toxic drug supply is putting people who use drugs at extremely high risk for overdose, for the complications of that, and for death. So expanding access to safer supply will save lives. And also importantly, we have learned that with addiction, connection is so important. And this is another mechanism that we can connect people to other parts of the service of the healthcare system or housing or even getting a meal for a day. Things that can make a difference in the chaos that many people's lives are and help them reach that point where things like treatment may be an option. It means now that this access, expanded access, means people who use drugs in all settings will have access to an alternative to the toxic street drug supply. There is no one single measure that is going to get us out of the toxic drug crises, but this is one more step in the right direction. Prescribed safer supply is another important tool in our toolbox that will help keep people safe and help them access the supports they need. We have said all along, it is not about harm reduction only, it's not about treatment only, it's about building up the full continuum of the tools that we need to make a difference for people's lives. Substance use, as we know well, is a health condition and must be approached from a holistic health perspective. And I will continue to call on federal, provincial, and municipal governments to ensure our public health care and community supports reflect an understanding of that reality. And this includes, of course, the work that we're doing on removing stigma through things like decriminalization of people who use drugs. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us as a community what is possible when we come together to support one another through a crisis. And thanks to the support of doctors, nurse practitioners who have worked through this pandemic to deliver safer supply during the emergency, as well as the efforts of countless others who are supporting people at risk of overdose death. We are making progress, but it is never fast enough or enough. With the toxic drug emergency still before us, I call on everyone in BC to keep responding with the same kindness and compassion that we have shown each other throughout this entire pandemic, and make sure that we can continue to support our loved ones and we move through this next phase. Thank you very much, and I'd now like to introduce Dr. Shannon McDonald, the Chief Medical Officer of the First Nations Health Authority.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Minister Malcolmson. I want to acknowledge the Lekwungen-speaking people of the territory of the Esquimalt and the Songhees and all of the nations who First Nations Health Authority serves. This is a story about all of us. I also acknowledge Dr. Chow and look forward to his words. I wish we didn't have to be here today. I wish that the work we did 5 years ago, 6 years ago, was enough, but it's not. I want to acknowledge the losses, the sons and daughters, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, friends, leaders, elders who have lost their lives to this toxic drug supply despite all the work that's been done. And given the significant impact of illicit and toxic drugs on BC First Nations, The FNHA is supportive of new and innovative approaches aimed at reducing overdose events and deaths due to toxic drugs. And the FNHA commends the BC government for the work to date on this new initiative and other work that we've done together over time, and for seeking the First Nations Health Authority's input. Implementation of the BC government's prescribed safer supply provides important tools to help reduce toxic drug overdose death among First Nations people who continue to be overrepresented as compared to the rest of the population. While a safer supply will decrease the chances of overdose due to unknown factors experienced in the illicit supply, there are some potential challenges related to the rollout of this program that ensure that it fulfills the cultural, health, and wellness needs of First Nations, and especially for those who use drugs. While prescriber safe supply will be beneficial for many in some specific populations and potentially in some specific geographies initially, it will form an important connection between primary care workers and people who are using drugs. We know that there continues to be barriers for Indigenous people based on differential access, mistrust, and racism experienced in the healthcare system, and to the lack of connection with primary care services in general. So the work of our partnership continues. The Prescriber Safe Supply Program is asking regional health authorities, agencies, and healthcare providers to work to create guidelines for the administration of the program. For First Nations people, there is a risk of inconsistency in approach across the province and among individual communities with potentially variant outcomes. We are spread thin as First Nations Health Authority, and all of those tables require our presence and our input. And I'm hoping that there will be some patience that allows us to do that. We need to continue the conversation, providing education and support to our healthcare professionals who may need to be a little more comfortable with taking on this task associated with providing safer medical-grade alternatives to street-level illicit toxic drugs. We don't want to limit the number of care providers who choose to participate in the program, so we want to make sure that all of the services in education, training, and support are available to them. The FNHA looks forward to working closely with the provincial government, with our partners at the PHO, health professionals, and local communities to ensure that this new program meets the needs of First Nations and that there is a successful engagement process to make that happen. Thank you. And I am honored to introduce the President of the Doctors of BC, Dr. Matthew Chow.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to join you today from the traditional territories of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and the Métis Nation Region Number 3. BC doctors look forward to increased actions aimed to reduce the harm from illicit drugs that are killing so many British Columbians. I speak from my personal experience of losing patients and mourning with families. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a specialist in mental health, and I'm pleased to say that due to the efforts, the Herculean efforts of people like Dr. McDonald, Dr. Henry, and this government, I have not lost a single young patient to COVID-19 during the duration of this.
Well, actually, we'll go to the room here first for the first question. If there's anybody here, you can come forward to the microphone for a question. Please identify yourself, your full name, plus your media outlet, who you're going to direct the question to, and then your question. Then we'll go immediately over to online, Nora. Then we'll go to another question in the room. If you're getting a one-on-one interview, we're going to ask that perhaps you refrain because you're going to have that one-on-one interview. For those who do not, we will take a question floor. Again, we're looking for one question per person. Thank you so much. Please proceed. Oh, just 1 second. Microphone, please. Check, check, check. Check.
Check. There we go. Hi there. My name is Neetu Garcha. I'm a journalist with Global News. First of all, my heart and my thoughts are with you, Chief Casimir, and the entire Tecumloops Tushwetmik First Nation. My condolences to all of you. It was mentioned, and perhaps, Sarah, you're the best person to answer this question, that part of the reason these 2 acres out of 160 were selected for this GPR survey was because a juvenile rib bone and a tooth were discovered. Do you have any details on when those were discovered and by who? And if I can ask a follow-up after, I would appreciate. No, okay, that's okay.
I'm very strict on this one. You get
That's
one
okay.
question, make it good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to Sarah Beaulieu, right to my first person to my right, please. Not yet? Not yet.
Well, yeah.
There we go.
The juvenile tooth was excavated, I think, in the late 90s or early 2000s in a shovel test pit during an archaeological excavation by Simon Fraser University. The juvenile rib was surfaced in the same area in the early 2000s and was brought into the museum by a tourist. And was identified, yes, identified as a juvenile rib bone and then documented subsequently from there.
Thank you so much. We're going to go over now to Lindsay Shepherd online. Nora, can you confirm, am I just asking the question from the chat or is she addressing? So from the chat, this is Lindsay Shepherd is from what media outlet, please? Identify yourself in the chat, Lindsay Shepherd, of what media outlet you're from. We'll go to the next question on the floor. Thank you so much. True North? So Lindsay Shepherd from True North, the question is for Sarah. Excavation plans to gain forensic evidence.
Sorry, one more time?
Excavation plans to gain forensic evidence.
I think with regards to forensics and anything else, social justice issues, it needs to be community-led. It wouldn't really be a question for myself to answer, but Chief Cookpee.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to the floor. Please identify yourself, what media outlet, and who you're addressing the question to, then your question.
Hello, it's Dirk Meisner. I'm a reporter with the Canadian Press, and this question's to Chief Casimir. It kind of goes on to the question just before. You had one of the survivors today say, leave the site alone, leave it undisturbed, don't disturb it. We're kind of hearing throughout this today that you might have to do more work, which includes excavation or digging. What more, I'm asking, what more are you planning to do?
Thank you for the question. So I do know that we at TTS are community driven. We do know that our membership has been grappling with the information that has been shared, and we do know that every step that we do take moving forward, we're going to be having the community consultation with our membership. And of course, there's been many questions surrounding, it being a crime scene and what those steps. First and foremost, it is about love, honor, and respect, and dignity moving forward.
Thank you very much. We have Julio Rivas from FA, I believe it is, FA, and he asks for National Chief Archibald. Who will investigate crime scenes and what are the askings of the federal government? So Chief Archibald, National Chief Archibald.
What's the second part?
Who will investigate the crime scenes and what are you asking of the federal government?
These are crime scenes, and so we need some kind of independent investigation. We know that, for example, the RCMP are a part of children being taken from their families and communities, and so we need some kind of independent investigator on this process, and we need also international examination into these crimes. We did have a recent resolution passed at the AFN-AGA on the International Criminal Court being involved in this process. And so there are a number of moving parts that we still have to figure out. An investigation must occur, absolutely. And the federal government, their role is to make sure that records are provided, that they work with First Nation communities on the ground. As Chief Casimir just said, this has to be a community-driven process. And so we would look to the federal government certainly to provide the resources that we need to conduct thorough investigations. We heard earlier about forensics, investigations of the sites. There are many layers to this, and the federal government in one way is in a conflict of interest because it was their policies that actually initiated residential schools in Canada. At the same time, they have to be accountable. They have to be responsible. And so these are conversations that I am going to be having at some point with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and members of his cabinet. We'll keep you posted. Miigwech.
Thank you so much. We're going to go to the floor. Just wait.
Well,
there we go.
There we go. Okay. My name's Jill Makashon. I'm with CTV National News, and this is a question for you, Dr. Is it Sarah Boulier? Am I saying that right? Yeah. We had initially, in the beginning phases, heard of 215 potential unmarked graves. We just want clarification. 200 anomalies now. Is it more of a are we understanding now more of the actual grave sites as opposed to what we first saw in late May?
No, nothing's changed. With ground penetrating radar, we can never say definitively that they are human remains until you excavate, which is why we need to hold back a little bit and say that they are probable burials. They are targets of interest for sure. They have signatures, multiple signatures that present like burials. But because of that, we do need to say that they are probable until one excavates.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Going to online, we have Zhang Li from City News for Cookbee. Can your community provide similar communities with costs of investigation? Oh, there we go. Check, check.
Check. Excellent. Thank you for that question. I know right now I can't exactly say what those numbers are until they're approved from the federal government, but we do know that there is a lot of work that needs to get done from every aspect, from looking at the costs that we've incurred to date, having to put up security and security at many levels, and also looking at the levels of professionals that we need to bring in to do those steps. And as we're going through each of those steps, I know all those costs are going to be confirmed as we go through step by step. We have put forward a preliminary budget and are working on a comprehensive budget to date. And I know most recently the provincial government made an announcement as well. And I know that part of that budget has also gone to the province as well.
Thank you so much. We'll go to the floor now, please.
Robin Gill with Global National News. This is for Roseanne. Given the age of the school, given how difficult it might be to find those records, how difficult is this going to be to actually identify, should this be actually a gravesite?
We're going to refer that question to Don Worm, who is our legal counsel, to provide technical support. Can you repeat the question, please?
Given the school is very old, given the fact that record keeping may not be accurate, how difficult is it going to be to actually identify should there actually be remains in those graves?
Well, I think what we can say firstly is that it's undeniable that those are graves. There is no question that there have been children gone missing. Our knowledge keepers from this community have told us so. We believe them. The work that needs to follow up on that has been outlined by Dr. Bolio. It is difficult work, but I think what you have borne witness today is a diligent community, is a powerful community that has worked extremely hard at revitalizing themselves, not just their culture and their language, but indeed their families and their people. I think that what you have seen is a fiercely independent nation, one that it is more than capable and exceptionally competent to engage in the sacred work as it's been described going forward. We are ready to engage in this work, and we have the experts on hand to be able to get on with the identification of these individuals and to conduct, as would be culturally appropriate, what type of excavations or exhumations that we have to go forward in terms of identifying these souls. Finally, once identified, there is, of course, a measure to be able to determine not just their identity, but where are their homelands and where would they be repatriated to. You heard from Cookbee that the children who were interned at this place came from all over British Columbia and indeed northern Alberta and the Yukon as well. The work that is necessary is being done by competent people. You have the Culture and Language Department who have been extremely busy on this. They remind us of the cultural protocols that we are obliged to follow in the work going forward. Yes, there are concerns that there are differences in wishes, that some people wish the place to remain undisturbed. There are others who are calling for the identification of these people because they know that these are their children. We need to balance those competing interests, and with the assistance of and the capabilities of this community and the experts that they already have, this work will be done.
Thank you. I have a question for Alex McQueen from the Toronto Star. He is directing it to Cookbee, but given what is being asked, I'm going to redirect it to our ground penetrating radar specialist, because it's about what are the factors to determine numbers of graves and ages of children. So Alex McQueen, we are redirecting your question to our technical expert, Sarah Beaulieu.
With regards to determining number of graves, as I went through on the slides, it was ruling out different anomalies such as root systems, stones, rocks, anything else under the surface that didn't present as a potential burial. With the notion of the targets of interest being children, the majority of the anomalies were between 0.7 and 0.8 meters below the surface, which is fairly shallow. It fits with the knowledge keepers' descriptions of children having to dig graves, for one. It also fits with when you have a juvenile burial, because they are smaller in length, they typically are not dug as deeply. So the length would have been taken into account in addition to the depth of the burial as well, to determine if the targets of interest were potentially children.
Thank you. We'll go to the floor.
Katie Nicholson, CBC News. This is for Cookbee Casimir. You mentioned you're still waiting to hear from the Prime Minister, and I wonder if you could maybe sort of expand on what it is you expect from the PMO in terms of leadership on this.
What I would expect is, communication, direct communication, with our local government. And, I would really hope that he does take us up on our invitation for him to come September 30th and to, come and hear our survivor stories and to, acknowledge what happened here, where it started here in Canada. And with us having to carry that message forward and to where we are to date.
Thank you. We'll take one more question from the floor, and we're wrapping up with that. Oh, I see another person agitated, so we'll go here and then there, and then we're wrapping up. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry, Sydney Chisholm, Castanet Kamloops.
I'm sorry, you got your mask on, and that's great, but it's a little muffled, so try again.
Sorry, Sydney Chisholm, Castanet Kamloops. Sorry, I was just hoping to clarify, has any site been excavated yet, and is the 215 number still accurate?
That's Sarah Bolio. Yeah, go ahead.
As far as excavation for these burials, nothing has been excavated yet. The number is 200, so once the survey was completed, I received, subsequent to the survey, archaeological reports that discussed impact assessments and excavation that had been done in the same area. And so I had to rule out where those excavations had taken place in the late 90s, early 2000s, and see if they impacted where I had done my survey, which is why I concluded with 200.
Thank you very much. We'll take a final question here.
Thank you so much. This is Kim McCrail from the Wall Street Journal. This question is for Dr. Beaulieu, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I'm just wondering if you could walk through a little bit about how you became involved in the first place. Did the community ask you to come in, and what were the steps that you took that led to the actual finding?
With this particular site, when I work closely with Dr. Eldon Yellowhorn at Simon Fraser University. He's a professor in the Indigenous department there, who has a relationship with Kamloops Secwépemc here. And because of the work I've done and his knowledge of what I do with GPR, it was a recommendation through there where I was invited to survey for Kamloops Secwépemc.
Thank you very much to all the media, both online and in person. I am going to call up, if we still have present, all of the Kamloops Secwépemc Chief and Council back here, because we were missing a couple of our council members for that very first shot.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Hello and good day, guten Tag. Welcome to today's press conference on COVID-19 updates. It is Thursday, 15th of July, and we have a very special guest today. Welcome to His Excellency, Federal Minister of Health, Jens Spahn. We of course also have Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, WHO Director General. We have Dr. Katharina Böhm, Chef de Cabinet, Dr. Mike Ryan, Executive Director, Maria van Kerkhove, Technical Lead on COVID, Dr. Bernhard Schwartländer, who is Special Advisor to the Director General, and Chief Scientist Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, and we have other guests and colleagues online. Simultaneous translation is available in the official languages and also in German, so journalists attending can also ask in German. With this, I'll hand over to the Director General for the opening remarks and welcoming our guests.
Dankeschön, Christian. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Or should I say, Guten Morgen, Guten Tag, and Guten Abend. Thank you for joining us today, and I would like to say heartily welcome to my friend Jens Spahn, the Federal Minister of Health of Germany. And may I add, vielen Dank, Jens, for your personal support over the past few years, and especially the past difficult 18 months, and for the incredible support of the German government and people for WHO and for global health. I would especially like to express my concern and condolences over the floods that are currently affecting Germany, and I offer my deep condolences to those who have lost someone they love, and my sincere hopes that those who are missing will be found soon. So welcome once again, and I would like to invite you to make your opening comments.
Yes, dear Tedros, ladies and gentlemen, meine Damen und Herren, the first sentences I do in English and I switch to German. Actually, it's good to be here again. It's more or less a year ago that I was here with the French colleague Olivier Véran to show again, actually, the commitment we as the Federal Republic of Germany and the European Union have to the work of the WHO. Und deswegen auch vielen Dank für den herzlichen...
And so thank you for your warm welcome here today. We have agreed that the pandemic is not yet over, although in some countries we are very pleased to see how far they have got in their vaccination campaigns. Although in many parts of the world we are still at the beginning of the vaccination campaigns, many should still be vaccinated, and in these discussions concerning Europe and Germany, I always say it's in our interest to ensure that the entire world is vaccinated, that everyone has access to a vaccine. This pandemic will not be over until it is over for everyone around the world, and this is why we, along with the WHO, support, and we also support the WHO, but together we also support programs to ensure that these vaccines are available in all countries, and we do this under the ACTA program. And today we will also be drawing up an agreement between the WHO and Germany that Germany will be providing 260 million euros in funding specifically for the WHO in order to help to see the development, production and distribution of COVID-19 tests, treatments and above all vaccines. As a country, Germany has decided to commit to this. We are also going to provide at least 30 million vaccines to third countries through COVAX. And today, I think we can say that we should be able to provide considerably more than these 30 million doses. This is our baseline. And in the next coming weeks and months, we should be able to provide more doses to share these with the countries in the world that need them most. Germany is one of the biggest donors for COVAX and ACTA with 2.2 billion euros that we're providing, and when these 260 million to the WHO are a part of that, this also demonstrates that Germany takes its commitments and its job very seriously in fighting international crises. However, it also demonstrates that we see the WHO as taking a leading role in international health politics, and above all, that we give it a leading role in fighting global health crises. Only with a strong WHO we will be able to overcome the COVID pandemic. Only with a strong WHO we will be able to overcome future crises. And for this reason, Germany is a committed and currently the biggest donor in 2020-2021 for WHO. Almost $1 billion were provided in 2020-2021 from the German government for the WHO in their work. And thus we are currently the biggest donor, but for me, I find this, I'm very pleased with this, but I also want to encourage all other member states. The WHO can only be as good as we allow it to be as the member states in providing funding, including their resources, their financial resources, in order to ensure that the WHO is able to cope with all the tasks that it is given during the pandemic and beyond, that if it is able to meet all these expectations, it also needs the financial means. And so I would also like to encourage all other member states to ensure that we have sustainable, not just in this moment of crisis, but that we have ongoing funding for the WHO. Another lesson we can learn from the crisis is that this cooperation can and should be even closer, particularly in times of pandemics. We are also drawing up a pandemic contract, which will be discussed in a working group here today. And what's very important to me here is that we need more commitment, including in the international agreements, the international health regulations. These have been in existence for several years, but previously they have not been binding because there was also no means for following up on this, for seeing how well the member states met these or followed these regulations, and therefore it's very important for cooperation to be very close, both to be able to follow up on these international health regulations, but also if there should be an outbreak and a crisis, that we should be able to act. And so I'm very pleased that there has been a first investigative mission in China, in Wuhan, looking at the possible root cause of the virus, but also I hope that this would have been only the first phase, that there will be ongoing investigation. We are very much interested in discovering where this virus came from, and I would also like to call on our Chinese colleagues that we will be able to continue in this investigation to lead to scientific results. So to sum up, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has demonstrated to us that a virus can only be fought internationally and together, and this is what the WHO stands for, and so do we as Germany, along with our EU partners and all other countries around the world. We are all committed to the World Health Organization and to making it even stronger in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And vielen Dank, Jens. As I think everyone knows, Germany has been one of the leading lights in the fight against the pandemic globally, under your leadership and that of Chancellor Merkel. Since 2020, Germany contributed close to $750 million to WHO, including more than $500 million to support the COVID-19 response. And as Minister said, Germany is the largest contributor to WHO. Germany was also one of the main drivers behind the formation of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator last year. And we're very grateful for the further contribution of 260 million euros and 30 million vaccine doses that Mr. Spahn has just announced. We'll be signing the agreement under the WHO Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan after 2 days press conference. This support comes at a critical time, with cases and deaths increasing globally. So thank you so much again, Mr. Spahn. Vielen Dank. As you know, the WHO Emergency Committee met yesterday and will publish its statement shortly. And I would like to thank Professor Didier Houssin, the chair of the committee, for his leadership and for joining us today. The committee has expressed concern that the pandemic is being mischaracterized as coming to an end when it's nowhere near finished. It has also warned about the strong likelihood for the emergence and global spread of new and possibly more dangerous variants of concern that may be even more challenging to control. The committee also expressed deep concern about the level of funding for WHO Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan for COVID-19, which constrains WHO's ability to coordinate the global response to the pandemic, particularly in terms of having the flexibility we need to move at the speed this virus moves. And the committee has called on all countries to support WHO's call to vaccinate at least 10% of the population of every country by the end of September. These donations announced by Germany today are another step towards reaching those targets. So my heartfelt thanks to Germany and vielen Dank again. But what I find even more encouraging is not just Germany's short-term support, but it is long-term vision. Together, we will end this pandemic, but our horizon must be further, and our ambition must be higher as we work together to prevent, detect, and respond rapidly to future outbreaks with pandemic potential. One of the clear lessons of this pandemic is that the world needs a strong and sustainably resourced WHO at the center of the global health architecture. Germany has been a driving force in advocating for a stronger WHO, but also in making it happen. You have truly walked the talk. And there is a big difference now between your visit last June and this time, almost a year. I also welcome Germany's support for the idea of an international pandemic treaty. Today, a working group of WHO member states is meeting to consider this idea and others to strengthen global health security. If the world continues down the same road, it will continue heading towards the same destination, which is an unsafe world, and another devastating pandemic is inevitable. We need a new approach and a new way of doing things. A treaty would provide a platform for closer international cooperation on preparedness, detection, and response. One key area in which improved cooperation is needed is in the way information about emerging pathogens and outbreaks is collected, analyzed, and disseminated. In May, Minister Spahn joined me to announce the creation of a new WHO hub for pandemic and epidemic intelligence in Berlin, which will open in September of this year. This new initiative will mark a step change in harnessing the power of modern technologies to give all countries the information they need more, better, faster to keep their people safe. So thank you once again, Mr. Spahn. We're in a critical moment, not just in terms of this pandemic, but in terms of the future of global health security. Germany's support and collaboration is incredibly valuable. Thank you and vielen Dank. Before we move to questions, I would like to invite Professor Houssin to make a few remarks about the outcomes of yesterday's emergency committee. Professor Houssin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Director General. Minister, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's true that the situation today, as it has been evaluated by the Emergency Committee, is not good. The recent trends are of concern. 18 months after the public health emergency was declared, we are still running to catch up with the virus, and the virus is still running after us. And if we want to maintain a global approach, when we're dealing with a global phenomenon, it's difficult to overcome all these difficulties. It's true that the evolution of the virus and the differences between the member states are a source of difficulty. I'd like to thank the Secretariat of WHO for the quality of information that we received in the Emergency Committee. And I would also like to thank the members of the Emergency Committee for the recommendations that they were able to make today. The recommendations are twofold. There are recommendations, first of all, to the Secretariat of the World Health Organization. It is clear that the technical expertise and recognized leadership of WHO is of utmost importance when dealing with this type of phenomenon. There is only one World Health Organization, and it is an entity which has a vision of the world and the necessary political strength to make a certain number of decisions. We have to make sure that WHO keeps informing on the evolution of the situation and constantly update on the evolution of the pandemic. And the two recommendations that have been made by the Emergency Committee to WHO are to continue to tirelessly advocate for fair access to vaccines and fair distribution around the world by encouraging local production, sharing of doses, and freeing intellectual property rights, as well as the transfer of technology, increasing production capacities, and of course necessary funding to implement all these measures. It's also essential to be extremely cautious. We should not be tempted to undertake any measures that could increase inequity. I'm referring, for example, to the decision made by some countries to promote a booster dose, a third dose of the vaccine, and when in fact there's no scientific data that justifies that for the moment if you look at the situation from a global point of view. The second recommendation of WHO is to guide the member states through the complexities of public health measures based on scientific evidence. It is clear that WHO can make a lot of clarifications in a complex situation. There are also recommendations to the member states. Of course, their main responsibility is towards their own population, but when we're dealing with an event like this, and here I'm mainly thinking about the governments of the member states, they also have a global responsibility, and I think that the Minister of Germany has expressed that very clearly a few moments ago. The main recommendation, therefore, that we've made to member states is to acknowledge that access to vaccines and public health measures to maintain social distancing should be taken very seriously. Now, I won't go into the details of the recommendations, but the main recommendations are to continue to use science to implement public health and evidence-based measures in the member states, and to avoid mass gatherings, organized mass gatherings based on a risk analysis. If these events are to be organized, it should be done so with all the necessary security measures. The second recommendation is to support WHO in its call for at least 10% of the population of the member states all around the world to have access to vaccination by September 2021. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor, for your leadership. And now back to you, Christian.
Very good morning to you, and thanks for joining today's press briefing. As of this week, our region reported nearly 74 million cases and 1.9 million deaths from COVID-19. Accounting for more than a third of COVID cases and more than 40% of deaths reported worldwide this week. And while new cases are down nearly 20% from last week, many countries, including the United States, are seeing a resurgence of infections. In North America, the United States of America and Mexico are reporting an increase in new infections across most states. Many Central American nations are also seeing cases, including in El Salvador, where a consistent increase in daily cases was noted between late June and early July, and Guatemala, where at departmental level there was surges in COVID deaths in the past 2 weeks. In the Caribbean, infections are also going up. Cuba reported the highest number of weekly cases since the start of the pandemic, and cases have tripled in the British Virgin Islands just weeks after reopening to cruise ships. Meanwhile, South America is reporting a mixed picture. COVID infections, hospitalizations, and deaths are dropping across most of the continent, including in Brazil, Peru, Uruguay, and Chile. However, infections are once again mounting in Argentina and in Colombia. They are reaching their highest ever levels, raising concerns about the health system's ability to cope, as 98% of ICU beds are already in use. cases rise when complacency sets in. We are all tired, but after experiencing successive peaks of infections in the same locations, we must break this cycle by embracing public health measures early and consistently. When variants of concern circulate, it's even more important that countries step up surveillance, especially while vaccine coverage remains low. 1 year ago, preparations were underway to launch what would become the COVAX facility. Yet today, just 1 in 10 vaccines administered worldwide have been here in the Americas. And even with limited bilateral deals, months of COVAX deliveries, and recent donations from countries like the United States, only 1 in 7 people in Latin America and the Caribbean have been fully protected against COVID. Money more than public health has determined how quickly countries can secure the tools that they need to combat this virus. As countries that struck deals with vaccine manufacturers pull further ahead, vaccination coverage continues to linger in the single digits for much of our region. In Chile, nearly 58% of people have been fully vaccinated against COVID. In Uruguay, 55% of people are protected. The United States has vaccinated nearly half of its population, and Canada isn't far behind. Meanwhile, Paraguay and Jamaica have fully vaccinated less than 3% of their population, and Honduras and Guatemala have yet to protect even 1% of their populations. The US government has generously donated nearly 12 million COVID-19 vaccine doses to countries in our region over the last few weeks, and additional deliveries are on their way with PAHO's help. These vaccines are bringing hope to countries that would otherwise have to wait months to secure even a fraction of these doses. And that's why we continue to urge donors and countries with vaccines to share them with our region. This remains the only way for many countries in our region to secure the doses that they need quickly. We are concerned about Haiti, which in the midst of considerable political turmoil has seen thousands of people displaced by growing violence and instability, and crowded shelters could become active hotspots for COVID transmission. Limited supplies and violence are also hindering the ability of health workers to safely care for patients in need. In some cases, patients may be avoiding seeking care due to safety concerns. PAHO, along with other partners, is committed to supporting the Haitian people in these uncertain times, and we urge other international organizations to join us in supporting the COVID response. Over the last few weeks, we've delivered considerable amounts of personal protective equipment. We've helped expand care for persons sick with COVID-19 and provided thousands of tests and laboratory materials to ramp up surveillance activities in Haiti. We've also helped train community health workers and have supported the Ministry of Health in preparing for COVID-19 vaccine introduction and setting up new systems to dispel rumors and COVID misinformation. While the situation in Haiti is unique, many countries in our region, from Colombia to Brazil and now Cuba, are experiencing waves of protests due in part to the impact of this pandemic. COVID-19 has not just ravaged our health systems, it has fractured social protection programs and destabilized our economies. A new report released by the Economic Commission on Latin America and the Caribbean last week paints a grim outlook for our region. More than 7 million companies have closed in Latin America and the Caribbean in the wake of the pandemic. More than a third of people in our region are living in poverty, and 1 in 4 worry about where they will get their next meal. Unemployment rates are higher here than any other developing region. The report shows how the pandemic continues to be fueled by inequality. And unfortunately, our region is the most unequal in the world. We urge countries to continue prioritizing health and social safety nets as part of their COVID response, and as they turn their sights to COVID recovery. Social protection is key, both to help people adhere to the public health measures that we know work, and to rebuild more inclusive, equitable societies. Across our region, we're paying the price of chronic underinvestment in health. So now is the time for countries to break this cycle by applying a public expenditure in health of at least 6% of GDP to health systems and to chart their path to recovery. Now also is the time for countries to renew their commitment to Pan-Americanism and solidarity. As we've said many times before, health is a fundamental right. It was so before COVID, and the unequal burden of this pandemic has painted the urgency of health equity under new light. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, doctora Etienne. Vamos a pasar ahora entonces a la sección de...
Thank you, Dr. Etienne. Now we will go to our question and answer session, and we have received questions from you by email, and there are questions on the Q&A. Please include your name and medium when you send us questions. The first question is from Dalien Politi from the New York Times in English.
Countries in the region are you most concerned about right now that have a mix of rising cases and low vaccination rates? Is there an effort to target these countries specifically with donations? Dr. Etienne?
So many thanks, Daniel, for this question. Rising cases and low vaccination rates throughout Latin America and the Caribbean are certainly a big concern for us here at PAHO. If we do not ensure that more equitable distribution of vaccines, not only in the North, but also in the global South, COVID-19 could continue circulating for years to come, ravaging health systems, taking lives, destroying livelihoods, and preventing things from ever getting back to normal. It is the ongoing disparity in access to vaccines that continues to prevent this, particularly given that despite best efforts from COVAX to secure doses, virtually all vaccines have already been purchased by high-income countries. Of course, we have been very concerned about those countries in our region that have been hardest hit by this lack of supply, and for them, vaccine donations have been and will continue to be an absolute lifeline. So this is why it is vital that we shift the conversation away from booster shots in the North to ensuring that everyone everywhere, and particularly healthcare workers and those most vulnerable to severe disease, are protected first. And there is enough scientific evidence that the current vaccines, together with the proven public health measures, are today effective against all variants of concern and can help save lives. So the quickest way to get the shots into the arms where they are needed the most today is through donations. Therefore, we welcome the recent donations from Canada through COVAX, and we thank the United States for its donation to Honduras, Bolivia, El Salvador, and other countries. And we also thank the other countries who are beginning to engage in terms of donation of vaccines. We stress that these doses should be donated to those countries where low vaccine coverage and high disease burden make them urgent priorities. So, as we've said before, this is a great start, but we need more vaccines in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we need them now. Over.
Gracias, doctora Etienne.
Thank you, Dr. Etienne. The next question is from Ariel Boglet from the Tribune in Bahamas. In English, he asked,
You're facing supply challenges, and is it only with AstraZeneca? And also, when will countries like the Bahamas get the shipment for Pfizer? Dr. Barbosa?
Thank you for this question. The COVAX facility has already delivered around 100 million doses to 135 participant countries. But as our director said, this is still a very limited amount of vaccines if we are talking about to get all the vulnerable groups protected and looking for the future to have the immunization coverage that we need to control the transmission. The COVAX facility has faced challenges to receive the vaccines from some producers. The AstraZeneca vaccine produced by Serum Institute of India, for instance, that had a contract with COVAX to deliver 161 million doses, only 29 million were really delivered, and the government of India has not yet allowed the export of these vaccines to be reestablished. Other sites of AstraZeneca also faced some regulatory challenges because all of them needed to receive the emergency use listing from WTO, so they also reduced around the 40% of the vaccines that were estimated to be delivered from February to June. And the Pfizer started delivering vaccines in February, but it's a small amount, so the total vaccine estimation from Pfizer, it was around the 15 million doses. Pfizer has delivered around the 12.5 million doses. We, as the revolving fund is working with the producers to get more vaccines, but the Bahamas will receive vaccines in July and August through COVAX. We are also working, it's estimated around the 57,000 doses to the Bahamas, but we have also other sources of vaccines to the Caribbean countries, including the Bahamas. We are working with the CARPHA, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, and the U.S. government to facilitate the deployment of the 3 million doses that the U.S. government is donating to the Caribbean. At the same time, the revolving fund is closing negotiations with the producers that will offer another source of vaccines to complement COVAX in the bilateral agreements that the countries have in order to achieve the immunization coverage that will allow the countries to control the transmission. Thank you.
Gracias, doctor. Tenemos varias preguntas.
Thank you, Doctor. We have several questions on the variants. I'm going to read some of them. Andrea Meraz from Grupo Formula Mexico. She asks how many variants of COVID are circulating in Mexico and in how many of the states, and are there some that are of concern to Bajo? Also, there's a question about the situation of the Delta variant in the U.S. and from Argentina. Juan Manuel Reyes asked what recommendation for the countries in the region, such as Argentina, to avoid the dissemination of the Delta variant. And what characteristics does this variant have in terms of transmissibility and mortality? Thank you, Sebastian. We have several questions which are quite precise in terms of their geography. So let me try to answer. Regarding Mexico, let me say that Mexico has one of the genomic surveillance networks which are among the soundest of the region. And it's run by INDRE. It's one of the regional reference labs for sequencing. So thanks to this capacity at state level in Mexico, Mexico has reported more than 15 sequences in global databases detecting almost 24 different variants distributed among the 32 states, including the concerned variants Alpha and Gamma, in addition to the Delta variant. Even though for this one at a lower percentage. Regarding the information from the last 28 weeks, the most widely detected variant, about 31% in the sequences, continues to be the B11519, which is presenting at global level, but it has not been classified as a variant of interest or a variant of high concern. However,
thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.